The smell of burnt sugar and stale coffee clung to my skin as the clock above the counter ticked closer to midnight. The Daily Grind Cafe was nearly empty, just a few tired souls hunched over chipped mugs and glowing phone screens. The flickering light above table 7 buzzed like a nervous heartbeat. My heart beat, my feet ached, and my hands smelled faintly of disinfectant, but I didn't mind. I was used to exhaustion. It was safer than thinking about everything else. Ava was behind the bar, wiping the same glass over and over. Her smile strained her hands, trembling slightly. I knew that look. Fear pretending to be calm. She had been quiet all evening, and I didn't have to ask why I already knew. His name had been hanging between us all week. Like smoke. Lorenzo Rossi. The man you never wanted to owe money to, the man whose reputation could silence an entire room with just the sound of his name. Ava's debt wasn't just numbers. It was chains, invisible but unbreakable. I had been saving every tip, every extra shift, trying to help her pay it off, but it was never enough. "You okay?" I asked softly, my voice barely cutting through the hum of the coffee machine. She nodded, too fast, too fragile. She was about to lie again when the bell above the door chimed. The sound was sharp, final, like the closing of a cell door. 3 men entered. The air seemed to thin as if the room itself was holding its breath. 2 of them were walls in suits, cold, expressionless. The third one was different. He didn't need muscle to be dangerous. He was danger in human form, tall, lean, dressed in a black suit that fit like sin, his dark hair slicked back, his face sculpted from stone and shadow. Lorenzo Rossi. His eyes swept the cafe, dismissive at first, until they landed on Ava and stopped. There was no warmth in them, just decision. His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, more like the idea of one. He began walking toward the B. His men spreading out behind him like silent thunder. Ava froze. The glass in her hand slipped onto the rubber mat and rolled away. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She looked like she might collapse. I felt a hot wave of protectiveness rise inside me, a wildfire of anger drowning out the fear. Lorenzo stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his gaze. "Miss Bianchi," he said smoothly, his voice low and soft, like velvet wrapped around a blade. "I believe you owe me something?" Ava's voice cracked. "Please, just a little more time." He chuckled, a cold, hollow sound, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He dropped it onto the bar, diamonds spilled out, glittering under the weak lights. Everyone stared, even Frank. The manager was frozen in the doorway. "This," he said, "is the value of your debt in full. Consider it paid, but you're finished. You'll never work in this city again. Leave tonight and don't look back." The words struck like bullets. Ava's eyes filled with tears. Her body trembled. She opened her mouth to beg, but I couldn't stand another second of it, the way he looked at her like she was dirt. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward before I even realized it. The world narrowed until it was just him and me. "Enough," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned his gaze toward me, slowly. Curious, his eyes, dark and endless, like a storm over the ocean. And then before I could think, before I could stop myself, my hand flew through the air. The sharp crack of flesh, meeting flesh, echoed through the cafe. Every sound vanished. The lights buzzed. The air held still. Lorenzo's head turned slightly, his jaw tightening, the faintest mark already blooming on his cheek. My palm stung like fire. My heart stopped. He could kill me right here, and no one would stop him. His guards reached for their jackets, but he lifted a hand, stopping them. His eyes locked on mine, and then he smiled. It wasn't kind or cruel. It was something else entirely. A strange, slow smile that chilled me to the bone. He touched his cheek where I had struck him and whispered almost to himself. Finally. Someone real. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, too silent. I had no idea what I had just awakened, but in that moment I knew my life would never be the same again. The night pressed close around me as I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. The glow from the screen painted my face in pale blue light. The message burned into my eyes. "Your presence is requested at the Rossi estate tomorrow at 7 p.m. sharp. Failure to appear will result in consequences for Miss Bianchi." I read it again and again, hoping the words would somehow change, but they didn't. They pulsed with quiet threat and control, the kind that didn't need to scream to terrify. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, every second pounding in my ears. I felt the walls of my small apartment closing in the air, thick and hard to breathe. Ava was asleep miles away, maybe safe for now, But if I ignored this message, if I defied him even once, he'd destroy her life without hesitation. I stood up, the floor creaking beneath my bare feet. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, my eyes wide, my jaw clenched, determination carving itself over fear. I had to go, but I couldn't let him see me shake. The next day passed like a blur. My hands trembled as I made coffee at work, but I forced a smile for customers, pretending the world wasn't about to swallow me whole by 6. I was home again, staring at my closet as if one dress could save me. I chose the dark blue one, simple, modest something that said, "I'm not weak," even if my heart was hammering like it wanted to escape my chest. At 6:45, a black SUV appeared outside my building. It didn't honk or flash its lights, it just waited silent like a shadow. The driver stepped out tall, built like stone, dressed in black. He didn't speak. He only opened the back door and nodded. Dead once the message was clear. Get in. The leather seat was soft, but it felt like sitting in a trap. The city lights flickered past the tinted windows as we drove each turn, taking me farther from everything familiar. Soon the streets turned quieter, wider, lined with trees. The houses grew into mansions until even they vanished, replaced by high walls topped with iron. The Rossi estate appeared like something carved out of a nightmare and a dream. All at once, tall iron gates slid open without a sound, revealing a long path lit by small golden lights. The mansion rose at the end like a dark cathedral, glass and stone gleaming under the moon. The car stopped before the massive doors, and my pulse roared in my ears. The driver opened the door again. I stepped out, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The air smelled of rain and something faintly metallic. The doors opened before I reached them. A woman dressed in black waited inside, her expression unreadable. "Miss Vance," she said quietly. "Follow me." Inside, the air was cool, dry, almost too clean. Marble floors reflected light from a chandelier that hung like captured lightning. Every footstep echoed a countdown to something I didn't understand. Portraits lined the hallways, faces of men who all looked the same, power carved into their features. The woman stopped before a tall wooden door and gestured. I swallowed hard. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The room beyond was dim. The smell of old books and polished wood wrapped around me, and behind an enormous desk sat the man I had slapped, Lorenzo Rossi. He didn't look up right away. He was signing something, his pen scratching softly across paper. When he finally lifted his gaze, it felt like the world tilted again. Those eyes, gray like a storm about to break, pinned me in place. "Miss Vance," he said softly. "Please sit." His voice was calm, too. Calm, like the silence before a gunshot. I sat in the chair across from him, my hands clasped tight in my lap, my heart beating like a trapped bird. He studied me in silence for a long time, then smiled that same unreadable smile. That haunted me since the cafe. I expected fear, but what I felt instead was something far stranger, curiosity, confusion, and beneath it a flicker of something I couldn't name. "You came," he said. "I always honor courage. I expected more excuses or begging, but you came." His tone shifted, darker, smoother now. "I know what you are, Lily, someone who acts before she thinks, someone who defends what she loves." My throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" I managed to whisper. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk, his eyes glinting with quiet fire. "I want to understand you," he said, "and I want to see what a woman like you does when her choices vanish, one by one." My stomach twisted, the realization sinking deep. I hadn't been summoned to beg for Ava's freedom. I had been invited into something far worse, a game, and in his eyes, I wasn't prey, I was the prize. The air between us crackled, silent and heavy. I could almost hear my own heartbeat in it, and deep inside that darkness, a dangerous truth whispered. He didn't just want obedience, he wanted me, and that was far more terrifying than any threat he could ever make. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of the Rossi estate, soft and cold like silver water. I hadn't slept at all. The night had been too heavy with thoughts. His voice, his stare, the way his words curled around my name like a promise and a warning. The room they gave me was beautiful, but beauty here felt like a trap. Every piece of silk and marble whispered of control. A quiet knock sounded on my door before I could answer. It opened. A young maid stepped inside, her eyes downcast. "Breakfast. Miss Vance and Mr. Rossi requests your presence." After she set down the tray and left without waiting for a reply, my stomach twisted. I wasn't hungry, but I forced down a few bites. I needed strength. I needed my mind sharp. The walk to his study felt endless. The halls were lined with paintings of men who looked like they'd never known mercy. Every step echoed on the marble like a countdown. When I entered, Lorenzo was already there, seated behind his desk, sunlight catching in his dark hair. He looked up, and for the briefest moment, something human flickered in his expression. Then it was gone, replaced by that calm, unreadable mask. "Sit," he said softly. I obeyed. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused. His gaze stayed on me, heavy as iron. He leaned back, fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "Ava Bianchi is free." He said the words so casually I almost didn't believe them. "Her debt is gone. She has left the city." I blinked, confused. Then relief crashed into me like a wave. I wanted to thank him, to ask why, but before I could, he continued, his tone turning colder. "But that freedom has a cost, not for her. For you struck me in public. You humiliated me. Yet instead of punishment, I offer you something different. You will work for me, live here in my estate as my personal assistant until I say otherwise." The air left my lungs. I stared at him, disbelief and anger flaring. "What you mean, a prisoner?" He tilted his head, his eyes glinting. "You may refuse, of course, but if you walk out that door, Ava's debt will return with interest, and I assure you her second chance will end much less kindly." Rage burned through the fear. He was twisting the knife, using my loyalty as his leash. I rose from the chair, my voice shaking. "You think you can control everyone with threats?" He smiled faintly. "Only those worth controlling." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. He stood slowly, moving around the desk, each step deliberate, until he stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body against the chill of the air. He smelled of expensive cologne and something darker, power danger. "You intrigue me, Lily," he murmured. "Most people tremble or beg, but you fight even while you... Hen, you are cornered. That is why I want you here. I want to see what you will do when your cage has no bars." My throat tightened. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "If I stay, it's for Ava, nothing else." His smile deepened. "Good, then we understand each other." He turned away, as if the conversation were already over. "Call Elena. She will show you your quarters and your duties." He paused, then looked back, his voice lower, almost a whisper. "Welcome to your new life, Miss Vance." As I followed the silent woman out, the weight of what had just happened settled over me. I had entered the cage willingly. Every door I passed seemed to close behind me, sealing my fate. But beneath the fear, something unexpected stirred a spark, not of submission, but of defiance. If he wanted to study me, he would soon learn that the real danger wasn't in my fear. It was in what I could become inside his darkness. And somewhere deep inside the mansion, I could feel his gaze, even from afar, watching. Waiting, knowing the game had only just begun. The first morning in the Rossi estate felt like waking up inside a dream that didn't belong to me. The curtains were silk, the sheets smooth as water, and the faint scent of roses drifted in from the garden outside. But the beauty of it all only made my chest tighter. This wasn't comfort. This was control. Every inch of the room whispered that I was somewhere I didn't belong. A knock came at my door before sunrise. The same quiet maid from the night before entered, holding a tray with tea and toast. Her eyes never lifted from the floor. "Mr. Rossi expects you in the study in 20 minutes, she said, then slipped out like a ghost, leaving behind a silence that felt too large. I dressed quickly, choosing the plainest outfit I could find, a simple cream blouse and dark skirt. My hands shook as I tied my hair back. I needed to look composed, even though my heart felt like a caged bird beating itself against the walls. I walked through long halls lined with portraits of men whose cold eyes seemed to follow me, Genera, shins of power staring down from gilded frames. The study door was open. He was already there behind his desk, sunlight spilling over his shoulders as he wrote, his expression focused, distant. He didn't look up when I entered. "Sit," he said, and I obeyed. My fingers curled around the edge of the chair, trying not to fidget. "Today, you will begin your duties." His tone was calm, measured. "You will help organize the archive, the books in this room, the correspondence, the schedules. You will have access only to what I permit, and you will never step outside the gates without my approval." I nodded, biting back the words. I wanted to say that I wasn't his servant, that I didn't want his rules. Instead, I simply said, "Understood." His gaze lifted, meeting mine for the first time that morning. His eyes were pale gray, like the sky before a storm. His lips curved just slightly. "Good. You learn quickly." The hours passed in quiet tension. I catalogued books, their spines worn smooth by time. Some titles were in languages I couldn't read. Others were histories of old empires and families whose names whispered of money and blood. I could feel his eyes on me, sometimes watching as I moved around the room. Not predatory, not yet, but observant, as though he was trying to read me the way one studies a secret. By evening, my back ached and my head spun when I turned to leave. He spoke again, his voice softer. "Tell me, Miss Vance, do you always defy fear, or do you just hide it?" "Well?" I froze, then looked at him over my shoulder. "Fear only matters if you let it decide for you," I said quietly. His smile deepened, almost approving. That night, I wandered the halls unable to sleep. The estate seemed endless, corridors stretching into shadows, the air humming with secrets. I heard low voices behind a half-open door, men speaking in Italian, sharp tones slicing through the silence. One phrase caught in English, "An accident needs no witness." My blood turned. Cold, I slipped away before they could see me. When I reached my room, the maid was there waiting. Her face pale. "Miss Vance," she whispered, "you should not walk the halls after dark. Not tonight." Why, I asked. She hesitated, then looked toward the window as if afraid to be overheard, because sometimes the walls listen. Her words followed me into uneasy sleep, and when I finally drifted off, I dreamed of footsteps echoing down endless marble halls and a voice whispering close to my ear. "You can run if you wish, Lily, but I always find what belongs to me." I woke gasping, the moonlight spilling across the floor, cold and sharp. I didn't know if it was a dream or a promise, but I could still feel the warmth of his voice against my skin, and deep inside I knew the game was shifting. He wasn't just watching me anymore, he was drawing me closer, one careful move at a time. The morning came heavy with mist, the kind that blurred the edges of the world outside my window. The estate looked softer through it, quieter, almost peaceful, but I knew better. Peace here was only a mask, and somewhere beneath it the ground was already moving, shifting with secrets I could almost feel. I dressed quickly and stepped into the hall. The faint echo of footsteps somewhere ahead made me pause. Lorenzo's voice carried through the air, deep, calm, and commanding. I followed the sound until I reached the study. The door was half open. He was on the phone, speaking in Italian, the words flowing like a blade hidden behind silk. I couldn't understand them, but his tone told me enough: danger, urgency, power. When he ended the call, his gaze flicked up and caught me watching. "You move quietly, Miss Vance," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "Come in. I need you today." I walked in, my pulse racing, trying to mask my nerves. The scent of cedar and old books filled the air. He handed me a folder, thick with papers. Cross-reference. These schedules with the reports inside. Find the errors I trust you can handle. That I hesitated, then nodded. He smiled faintly. That same unreadable smile. "You learn fast." "Good, I like people who learn fast." I sat across from him, sorting through the papers, his eyes returned to his own work, but I could feel his attention brushing against me like static. The minutes stretched into hours, silence filling the space between us, thick and alive with something unspoken. I stole a glance at him, his jaw tense, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the desk. I realized he wasn't as calm as he looked. Something was wrong. When I finished, I set the corrected schedule on his desk. He looked at it, then at me. "You moved my meeting with Mr. Dubois," he said, not accusing but curious. "Yes," I answered. "It conflicted with the asset appraisal in Monaco. I thought the larger deal should take priority." His brows lifted slightly. "Most people wouldn't dare to change my plans without permission." I met his gaze evenly. "Most people don't hire me." He laughed softly, a low sound that made my skin prickle. "Maybe you are right." His phone rang again. He answered. This time his face changed. His voice sharpened, the calm slipping away when he hung up. He stood abruptly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. A shipment intercepted on the docks. He said, "Someone thinks they can steal from me." His eyes flicked toward me for a moment. "Stay in your room until I return. Do not leave, no matter what you hear." He left the study like a storm passing through. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat frozen, staring at the door long after it closed outside. Through the window, I saw black cars pulling out of the gates, engines growling like beasts released into the night. The estate fell eerily still. Hours later he returned. It was past midnight. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, slower, heavier. He came into the study, his sleeves rolled up, faint smudges on his cuffs, his eyes darker than before. He poured himself a drink, the sea. Not of whiskey filled the air. Without looking at me, he said softly, "Do you know what? Loyalty costs, Lily." I said nothing. He turned then, his voice low and rough. It costs blood sometimes.
He stepped closer until he stood right before me, his gaze unreadable. I handled it, he said simply, his tone final, but his hands trembled slightly. He wasn't bragging, he was confessing. I should have been afraid, but what I felt was something else, something raw, sympathy, maybe understanding. The man who ruled through fear was bleeding inside, even if no one could see it. He noticed my silence and tilted his head. You aren't afraid of me, are you? I met his gaze steady. No, you should be, he said, but his voice didn't sound like a threat, it sounded like regret. When he left, I stood by the window watching the fog swallow the gardens. The world outside looked quiet again, but I could still feel the echo of his words. Loyalty costs blood sometimes, and I knew then the danger wasn't just in his world, it was in what he was slowly awakening inside me. The longer I stayed, the more the line between fear and fascination began to disappear. The rain had been falling since dawn, soft at first, then harder, until it sounded like the sky itself was breaking apart over the estate. I stood by the window watching it streak down the glass, the gardens below blurred into shades of silver and green. I had started to find a rhythm here, days filled with silent work in the study, nights filled with questions I couldn't answer, but something about this morning felt wrong. The air was heavy, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Lorenzo hadn't appeared for breakfast, which was unusual. He was a man of order. His absence carried weight. The staff moved quickly, whispering in corners, the air pulsing with quiet tension. I tried to focus on the stack of ledgers in front of me, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every creak of the old house made me flinch. When I finally stepped outside for air, the storm had eased to a fine mist. The scent of wet earth and roses clung to everything. The garden was still beautiful, but there was a strange silence hanging over it, like the world was holding its breath. I walked along the gravel path, my shoes crunching softly on the wet stones, and for a moment it felt like I was the only person left in the world. Then I heard it, a sharp crack that split the air, like the world itself had snapped apart. My breath caught, my heart slammed against my ribs. Instinct screamed at me to run. Before I could move, a hand closed around my arm, strong and unyielding, pulling me backwards. I gasped, twisting to see him, Lorenzo, his suit soaked from the rain, his face set in cold fury. He dragged me behind a marble column, his body shielding mine. Another crack echoed, distant but real. Gunfire. The realization hit like ice. They were here, whoever he had warned me about before, the rivals, the ones who wanted to test his power. They had come. Stay down, he ordered, his voice low but edged with steel. I could feel the heat of him even through the chill rain. His eyes flicked to the trees, scanning every shadow. He pulled a small weapon from his jacket, smooth, precise, his movements fast, controlled, a predator protecting what was his. My pulse raced. I tried to speak, but my voice failed. He looked at me once, sharp eyes blazing with something fierce and unspoken. You shouldn't have come outside, he said. I didn't know. I whispered, the words breaking apart in my throat. He exhaled, slow, steady, then his hand brushed my cheek for the briefest moment, grounding me. Stay here no matter what happens. He moved like smoke, silent, dangerous, a dark figure against the silver rain. I pressed my back to the cold stone, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The world around me was all sound and heartbeat. The next few minutes stretched forever, until the shooting stopped, replaced by shouts in Italian and the roar of engines pulling away. Then silence again, heavy and absolute. Lorenzo returned, his hair damp, his jaw tight, his eyes scanned me from head to toe. You're hurt? No, I breathed, shaking but uninjured. Good, he said, his voice softer. Now we go inside. He took my hand, guiding me back through the hallways, his grip firm and warm against my trembling fingers. Inside, he stopped by the study, his shoulders tense, droplets of rain still clinging to his collar. He turned to me, his gaze darker than I'd ever seen. From now on, you don't leave this house without me, he said. Do you understand? They wanted a message. They thought you would be my weakness. They were wrong. Something in his voice cracked on that last word, and I saw it, the fear buried under his control, the realization that for all his power, he couldn't bear to lose me. The silence between us hummed with it. My heart thudded against my ribs, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, dangerous and undeniable. As lightning flashed across the window, he stepped closer, his hand still holding mine. His eyes met mine, and for a long breath neither of us moved. The storm raged outside, but inside it was a different kind of storm, the kind that begins when two people realize they've crossed a line that can never be undone. The night was restless, the air thick with the echo of the storm. Even after the rain had stopped, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made my pulse quicken. I kept replaying the look in Lorenzo's eyes from earlier, the way his hand had lingered on mine, not as a threat but as something else, something that made my chest ache and my stomach twist. I had felt safe with him, and that terrified me more than the gunfire. When dawn came, the sky was pale and bruised. The estate was quieter than usual, too quiet. The Staff moved like ghosts, their eyes lowered, their voices hushed as if afraid to draw attention. I dressed quickly and went to the study, but Lorenzo wasn't there. The chair behind his desk sat empty, papers scattered across the surface, a coffee cup still half full. The air carried the faint scent of him, cedar smoke and power. I turned toward the door but froze. A shadow moved at the corner of my vision, a figure standing too still, too silent. Before I could react, something sharp pricked my neck. My breath caught. I spun around, but the room tilted, the world dimming, voices blurred around me, a man's laugh, rough and cold, the last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke, my head was pounding, my wrists bound with coarse rope. The smell of rust, oil and decay filled my lungs. I was lying on a concrete floor, the faint hum of machines somewhere close. I blinked until the blur cleared enough to see dim light filtering through metal beams. An abandoned warehouse. Two men stood near the door, armed and whispering in low tones. I didn't recognize them, but the tattoos on their necks told me enough. They weren't his. They were the ones who had attacked the estate. Fear clawed up my throat. I tried to move, but the ropes bit into my skin. They hadn't gagged me yet. Maybe they thought I was too weak to fight. They were wrong. I forced myself to breathe steady, slow. Listen. One was pacing, the other checking a phone. Their plan wasn't careful. They thought they'd already won. Hours passed, the cold sinking deep into my bones. Then the heavy doors groaned open, light poured in, harsh and white, and behind it came the sound of boots, echoing steady, deliberate. My heart stopped. Lorenzo, he moved like shadow and fire, his men behind him, his eyes searching until they found me. For a second his control cracked. Raw relief and fury flashed across his face. The next few moments were chaos, gunfire, shouts, the crack of metal hitting metal. The world turned to smoke and heat. Lorenzo's men moved with deadly precision. I ducked my head as bullets tore through the air. Then suddenly he was there beside me, crouching, his hand cutting through the rope. One clean motion. Lily, he said my name, a whisper and a promise. Are you hurt? No, I choked out, my throat raw. I'm fine. His jaw tightened. Good, stay behind me. He stood, drawing his weapon, and in that instant I saw what he really was. Not just the calm man behind the desk, but the beast the world feared, fast, ruthless, unstoppable. Within
minutes, the noise died down, leaving only silence and the faint hiss of smoke. He turned to me, breathing hard, his white shirt streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes softer than I had ever seen. He cupped my face with both hands, his palms rough, warm. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I've got you." His voice trembled just slightly enough for me to know the truth beneath the steel. He had been afraid. As he pulled me to my feet, my knees buckled. He caught me before I fell, his arms strong around me. I could feel his heart pounding fast and wild against my cheek. He carried me outside into the cold night, the smell of gunpowder mixing with rain. His men followed, silent, grim shadows fading into the darkness. In the car ride back to the estate, I sat wrapped in his jacket, the fabric heavy with his scent. He didn't speak, just held my hand, his thumb tracing circles over my skin. It should have felt possessive, but instead it felt like a tether, something that anchored me to the world again. When we reached the mansion, he didn't let the staff touch me. He lifted me in his arms, carried me through the grand halls, past the staring portraits, straight to my room, his voice low and rough. "No one hurts what's mine ever again." The words should have frightened me, but they didn't. They sank deep into my chest, burning through the fear. All I could think was that he had come for me, that he had walked through hell to bring me back. And even though I knew what that meant, the danger, the darkness, the price, I also knew there was no escaping him anymore. Not because he owned me, but because somewhere along the line I had stopped wanting to run. The world outside the window was quiet again. But the quiet didn't feel safe. It felt heavy, too perfect, like a trap waiting to be sprung. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the blanket Lorenzo had thrown over me hours earlier. The scent of smoke and rain still clung to it, the scent of him. The memory of what he'd done to find me lingered in every corner of the room. He had saved me and destroyed men to do it. I didn't know which. Terrified me more. The door opened softly. I looked up. He stood there, still in the same dark shirt from the night before. The sleeves rolled up, faint stains of dried blood near the cuffs. His face was unreadable until his eyes met mine. Something unguarded flashed through them. Relief, maybe guilt, maybe both. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You should be resting," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But I couldn't stay still," I whispered. "You killed them, didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. He crossed the room, his movements calm, precise as always. Then he stopped near the window, staring out into the pale morning light. Finally he said, "They made a choice. They knew the cost. I only collected what they owed." His tone was ice, but his hands were clenched, his jaw tight. I stood slowly, my knees weak but my anger stronger. I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't have to. He turned sharply, his eyes dark, like the sea before a storm. Yes, I did, he said. They took you from me. Lily, that was their mistake. The words hung between us, too close, too raw. Something in his voice trembled under all that control. It wasn't just rage, it was fear. I swallowed the lump in my throat, afraid to understand what that meant. You can't keep living like this, I said quietly. You can't fix everything with violence. He looked at me long and hard, then something shifted in his expression. The walls he always hid behind cracked just slightly. You think I don't know that? He whispered. I built this empire to survive, not to feel. But then you appeared, and now every breath, every thought feels like a weakness. He moved closer, his steps slow, deliberate, his voice dropping lower when they touched you. When they took you. Something inside me snapped. I have done unforgivable things. But that moment was the first time I ever felt fear. Real. Fear. I could hear the truth in his voice, and it unsettled me more than any threat he had ever made. I wanted to hate him for it, for dragging me into his world. But when I looked at him, all I saw was a man who didn't know how to live without the armor he had built around himself. He reached out his hand, brushing his fingers lightly over the faint bruise on my wrist, where the ropes had been. His touch was gentle, hesitant, as if afraid I would pull away. I didn't. His thumb traced slow circles against my skin, and for a heartbeat the world outside disappeared. You shouldn't touch me, I whispered, but I didn't move away. He smiled faintly, a sad, dangerous smile. You say that, but you don't step back. His hand dropped, and he took a step away, his control returning like a mask snapping into place. You will stay inside the estate until I say otherwise. The city isn't safe yet. I'll handle the rest, and how many more people will you destroy? I asked. He stopped in the doorway without turning his head. Only those who deserve it, he said, then left. That night the estate was alive again, voices murmuring behind closed doors, cars coming and going, the faint scent of gun oil and tension in the air. I wandered to the balcony above the gardens, the moon reflected in the wet stone paths below, shadows moved among the trees, guards, maybe something else. Behind me, I heard his voice again. Softer this time? You shouldn't be out here alone? His reflection appeared beside mine in the glass, his eyes not cold now but tired. I turned slowly, and for a moment we just stood there, the air between us charged with things neither of us could say. You don't have to protect me, I said. Finally, you just have to stop making the world bleed around you. He looked at me, and for the first time I thought I saw something break inside him. I'm trying, he said quietly, but the only thing I know how to do is fight. He stepped closer until the distance between us vanished, his breath warm against my skin, his hand lifting. He, sitating before it found my cheek, I could feel his heartbeat in the air around us, loud and steady, and I realized that even if I wanted to run, I couldn't anymore, because what terrified me most wasn't his darkness. It was that I could see my reflection in it, and part of me was starting to belong there. The rain had stopped, but the air inside the estate still felt heavy, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I hadn't seen Lorenzo all day. The halls were too quiet. The staff moved faster than usual, eyes lowered as if afraid to be seen. I could feel something shifting underneath the calm, something dark and alive. By evening the tension was unbearable. I went to the study hoping to find answers. The door was slightly open, the room dimly lit, the scent of whiskey and smoke lingered in the air. Lorenzo sat in the armchair near the window, his jacket gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his head bowed over his hands, the weight of silence wrapped around him. I hesitated at the door. He didn't look up, but his voice reached me soft, tired. Come in, Lily. I stepped closer. My heart pounding louder with every step. He looked different, not like the man the world feared, but like someone haunted by everything he'd done. His eyes lifted to mine, and the sight of them stole my breath. There was no armor, no mask, only a man carrying the ghosts of his choices. You shouldn't be here, he said, but his tone held no command, just exhaustion. I ignored him. What happened today? He laughed softly, a sound without joy. Today I learned that power means nothing when you can't protect what you care about. He poured another glass of whiskey, his hand shaking just slightly. You told me once that I couldn't fix everything with violence, he said. Maybe you were right. I stared at him, not knowing what to say. He looked up again, and this time there was something raw in his eyes. Fear not for himself, but for me, Theo. "I know about you," he said finally. "The rival families, the ones we fought, they know you mean something to me that makes you a target. Now you understand why I tried to keep you inside these walls." The words hit me like ice. I took a step back, my stomach twisting with dread. "I can't live like a prisoner, Lorenzo," I said, my voice trembling. He stood, his movements slow, measured, but his eyes burned with intensity. "You don't understand, Lily. If they come for you, I will destroy everything to stop them." He moved closer, the space between us charged. His breath brushed against my cheek, his voice dropping lower. "You've changed me. You made me weak. You made me want things I should never want," I whispered. "Then why does it feel like you're the only one who can keep me safe?" He froze his hand, hovering inches from my face. His eyes searched mine for a long moment. Then something inside him broke. He reached out finally, his fingers brushing my jaw, light as a promise. Because he said, "You make me real." His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. His lips barely touched mine. But the world shifted, the air disappeared. The moment hung fragile and endless. Then he kissed me, slow, deep, filled with everything we hadn't said, every emotion we had tried to bury. His control vanished, his hands gripping my waist, my fingers curling into his shirt. The kiss was fire and confession and surrender all at once. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, breathing hard, his voice a whisper. "This shouldn't have happened, but I don't regret it. You shouldn't either." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time I saw not a monster or a savior, but a man lost between both of those worlds. "You're not the only one who's afraid," I said softly. "But I'm not running anymore." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that could shatter a heart. "Stay," then he murmured. "Just stay." The lights flickered suddenly. The hum of electricity breaking through the silence, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Urgent, rapid, a guard burst into the room, his voice breathless. "Sir, we found something in the north wing. The Sikam." Amaras were cut. Lorenzo's face changed. The softness vanished, replaced by the cold edge of danger. He turned to me, his tone sharp. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone." He was gone before I could speak, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. I stood frozen, the air thick with dread, the flickering lights casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, somewhere deep in the mansion, a door slammed, then silence followed by one sharp sound, glass breaking like the shattering of peace itself. I didn't know it yet, but that night would change everything, because sometimes love doesn't save you, it only shows you what you're willing to lose to keep it. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the halls, followed by a heavy silence that seemed to stretch forever. I stood in the study, my hands trembling, the faint hum of the storm outside, the only sound left. The lights flickered once, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The only thing louder than the pounding in my chest was the thought that something terrible was happening to him. I moved to the door, pressed my ear against the wood. The hallway beyond was quiet. Too quiet. Then a faint sound, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I stepped back, my pulse racing, remembering his order. "Lock the door." My fingers fumbled with the bolt, but before I could turn it, the handle moved on its own. I froze. "Lily." His voice came low from the other side. "Open it, it's me." For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Relief crashed through me. I unlocked the door, but when it swung open, the sight before me made the air leave my lungs. Lorenzo stood there, his shirt torn a cut along his arm, blood trailing down to his wrist, his eyes wild with fury and fear. "They were inside," he said, his voice sharp but low. "2 men from the rival house. One escaped, one didn't." He looked around, scanning the shadows before his gaze returned. "And to me they came for you, Lily. They think hurting you will break me." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "This has to stop. It will never end if you keep fighting this way." He stepped closer, his eyes burning with something between rage and desperation. "I can't stop it." "Not now," he said softly. "But maybe you can." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black envelope sealed with wax. He handed it to me, his hand trembling. "Take this," he said. "If anything happens to me, you go to the address inside. They will protect you. The world outside. My name is poison. You can't use it anymore. I didn't take it. I couldn't." He was talking like he already knew he wouldn't make it out of this alive. "No," I said. "You are coming with me. We both walk out of this together." He stared at me for a long moment, then his expression softened, the faintest trace of a smile ghosted across his lips. "I thought you'd say that." The next moment was chaos, the sound of glass breaking again from somewhere down the hall, a gunshot, the crash of furniture, his men shouting orders. Lorenzo pulled me behind him, moving fast down the corridor, shadows slicing across the walls, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Another shot rang out. This one closer, sparks flew from a light fixture above us. He dragged me into the ballroom, the wide open space glowing faintly from the lightning flashing through the tall windows. One of the rival men stood near the center. His gun raised, his voice dripping with venom. "The king falls tonight, Rossi. Everything happened in seconds." Lorenzo moved like a blur, tackling the man to the floor. The gun went off again, echoing through the vast room. I screamed as both men struggled, the sound of glass splintering under their weight, lightning flashing across their faces. A shot, another, then silence. For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the windows. I stumbled forward, my eyes searching the floor. The rival man lay still motionless, but Lorenzo was on his knees, one hand pressed to his side, blood spreading across his shirt, his breath coming fast, shallow. I dropped beside him, my hands shaking. "You're going to be fine," I whispered. "We'll call someone." He caught my wrist, his grip still strong but his eyes already glassy. "Lily, listen to me." "No," I said. "You're not doing this. Not now." He smiled, faintly, his voice breaking. "I told you once. You made me real. I didn't understand it until now. I built everything on fear. But you taught me what it meant to care." I reached up, pressing my hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too much. His hand came up, touching my face one last time. "Promise me you won't stay in this darkness. Promise me you'll live." I shook my head, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I'm not leaving you." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a whisper. "You always were stubborn." Then his hand fell away. The storm outside cracked open the sky. The guards rushed in, their shouts, distant, muffled. I barely heard them. Everything blurred except his face, his stillness. Time passed. I don't know how long the next morning came, gray and silent. The estate that had once felt like a cage now felt like a tomb. His body was gone by dawn, taken by his men. The house filled with whispers of revenge and loyalty, but all I heard were his last words. Weeks later, I stood in the gardens, the roses he had planted blooming beneath the rain. I opened the black envelope he had given me. Inside was only one thing, a note written in his handwriting. "If the world ever asks who you are, tell them you were someone real." The tears came again, but this time they didn't burn. I closed my eyes, the rain soaking my face, and for the first time I felt something that almost resembled peace, because even though he was gone, his promise still lived in me. His love had broken the man the world feared, and somehow it had set me free.
As I turned to leave, a car pulled up at the edge of the estate. A man stepped out dressed in black, his voice calm. "Miss Vance," he said, "Mr. Rossi left something else for you before the end." He handed me a phone. The screen lit up, one new message from a name I thought I'd never see again. It read, "I'm not gone, Lily, not yet. The world still needs someone real." And in that moment I knew his story wasn't finished, not for him and not for me.